Now, I think part of what has happened in the meaning crisis is that we have been forced to reassess the materialist world. And we have been forced to recognize that there are realities above us that are governing us, that are not merely projections of us, since in fact, in many ways, we are subject to them. It sort of runs into the same problem that you have with Freud's God. God is simply a thing that we project into the sky. And the projection doesn't really cut it, because what we find is that we are in fact subject to much that isn't thingy, much that isn't material. And the further we go into this, the more we realize that there is in fact a lot that's going on that can't simply be projections, but it is in fact governing us, it is between us, it is among us, and in many respects it is above us. And that then challenges sort of the modern scheme, which says there are no conscious agents above us. We are it. So where do you go from that? Now, of course, John Vervaeke, many materialists just sort of bluster their way through it and don't want to talk about the fact that Uncle Sam is real, and Uncle Sam in the Second World War strode across the Pacific and put a hurting on the Japanese Empire, and Uncle Sam and the Russian Bear, along with European allies, destroyed the Third Reich. None of this stuff was real. All of this stuff became instantiated in armies and symbols and governments after the Second World War. The Allied forces joined in a system of denazification. You begin to have to ask, well, where exactly is the Nazification? Well, it's in the minds of the people, okay? But it's not just in their minds. It's between them. There are, in fact, real relations between people that sum up and become greater than just the people themselves. Now, all of the language that we had to deal with this has long been shoved to the side as this is archaic superstition and it needs to stay there. But suddenly we're looking for words to describe what's happening around us and above us and between us and through us, and we don't quite know what to say. And in many ways, that's at the bottom of this conversation, where you have someone like Jonathan Pageau, who sort of went all the way through the looking glass and came out the other end as an ancient person in many ways. And John Vervaeke, who is a careful scientist who's looking all the way through the looking glass, trying to figure out where exactly are we going and how can we talk about this?
I'm very suspicious of Elon Musk's claim because most of the science that it was based on has just failed to replicate massively. And so it's like I call that call. But let's say he was telling the absolute truth, and then we started getting all these neural links, and we could really speed up. Then many people say it's possible we could get an emerging consciousness that could be conscious of itself, independent of us. So I want to make clear that this is the argument is not an argument in principle, it's just an argument in practice. It says we don't think, for example, ant colonies achieve consciousness, even though they collectively solve problems. Like, there's a difference between us attributing an identity, and you're right, we don't attribute it to the ant colony and we attribute it to New York. But the key thing is whether the ant colony or New York attributes the identity to itself, right? So that requires self-consciousness. And I've expressed the doubts for why I don't think these entities have self-consciousness.
Yeah, and it's hard to perceive because we're not at that level. Also, we're at the level that we are, so we can't it's hard enough it's already impossible to verify consciousness of another human person directly. You only verify your own consciousness. So it would definitely be very difficult to verify the consciousness of a higher being because you're not there.
Sure.
Like you're just not at that level.
And this is where, when I talked about the corn, does the corn have consciousness? It has agency. Plants have quite a bit of agency. They tend to move much more slowly. The acorn can destroy concrete if it falls into a crack. So they have agency. Do they have consciousness? We don't know. It's very difficult to know. But one level up, this farmer has agency over the corn. What does the corn know of the farmer? What does the corn know of the farmer's dog? What does the dog know of the farmer? These levels are important because I remember reading the Poland book on psychedelics, very interesting chapter about mushrooms. And there's always these questions about who's running who here. We have this with dogs. Have dogs colonized us to have us contribute to their proliferation on the world? Who has domesticated whom? Have we domesticated livestock, or has livestock domesticated us?
But it would be, we would take seriously, and this is perhaps where we differ about whether or not these events have occurred, right? If that agency started to communicate with us in a self-conscious, self-identified fashion,
right? But you wouldn't. Let's say if the agency of the city would start to communicate with us, we would receive it at our level. So we would get it as a letter from the city saying that they're making taxes higher. That's how we would get it. Like it would come down that way. At the level, let's say, of the level of agency, it would be at a certain level, but at our level, it would.
Theologically, John Calvin called this accommodation. God would have to communicate to us at our level, within our symbolic realm, within our language, in order for us to derive some kind of knowledge and information from the other level. How can the farmer communicate to the corn or the rice? I'll use rice because we're in Sacramento. How can the farmer communicate to the rice? With fertilizer? Well, the rice probably knows very little of the crop duster.